All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming at this different time. Thanks, Johnny, for facilitating it. Yeah, so it's been a while. I think I haven't seen you all in like a year or something. We have moved to Greenville. So I'm teaching now at ECU, no longer at UNC, but I, see our tapestry or rug there. Oh, of course, no. It's I have family here. My mom has brought her here. So my family lives in my relatives live in Chapel Hill. So, and this earlier time is just easier for me to drive back afterwards. So I'm going to play mostly Franz Liszt today, and just talk a little bit about the pieces to you. Franz Liszt was a very interesting character. I mean, he was really unique. And he was born in 1811 in what's now Hungary. At that time was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Because of course, students of European history, know that the borders were always changing and shifting. And what we know today as countries, what's Italy or Germany now, was not it was not that back then. It was always changing. Anyway, the first piece I'm going to play is called the Hungarian Rhapsody number 11. And this is based on gypsy music, essentially. It's the folk music that Liszt heard growing up as a young boy in villages that are now Hungary. So you're going to hear, of course, it's Liszt's own composition, but it's heavily influenced by this folk music that he heard. A lot of great classical music, there's this sort of background to it, which is folk music. I think that's a subject that could be talked about more. It's, in other words, things, even Beethoven's music, they don't come out of thin air. There's a basis for it in folk music. The opening of this Rhapsody, this is, by the way, there's a more famous one, the second one, which you've probably heard like Tom and Jerry play, or the Looney Tunes, I don't know. This is not that one, it's less familiar. The opening, it says, like a cembalo, which is a gypsy instrument. It's a stringed instrument with these little mallets, and it makes this kind of tremolo sound. Let me see if I can emulate it. This is a little bit weird, but it sounds like that, actually. I was just playing the strings. That's what that instrument sounds like. But Liszt, he turns it, he emulates it on the piano, like that, So that's very interesting, how he takes this folk instrument and he just puts it in. I tell people, especially when I play more in the Greenville area, I say, I'm going to play Franz Liszt, and some people, they sort of bewildered. I said, look, this is country music. It's just Hungarian country music. It's the same thing. If he was living in Appalachia, he would have done that with the banjo or something. So that's how I would think of it. Then the opening is very improvisational, because that's what the gypsy musicians would do. They're known for improvising. It's like jazz. And then there's this kind of dance here, slow. And then this kind of virtuosity is a big part of the gypsy style. Yeah. And then it breaks out into this crazy ending, which, the very end is like insane, isn't it? It's a joyful, upbeat dance. There are Hungarian terms for each of these dances, and forgive me, I didn't do my research and I forgot the names, but those are Hungarian folk dances, essentially. So here it is, Hungarian Rhapsody number 11 by Franz Liszt, and it's echoing the music he heard as a young boy in Hungary. Not hungry like hungry, but Hungary. Have to be clear about that. That's Franz Liszt for you. He was, well, he channeled folk music through the piano, and I think that's incredible. And what Liszt is interesting, I think he gets, and I believed this for a time, he gets this kind of bad reputation as being a show-off, sort of superficial composer. And that is just not true, I've come to find out. There were pieces he wrote that maybe could be that, salon pieces, like the Grand Galop Chromatique, which I think is great fun, but maybe some people would look at that and say, well, it's not Beethoven. Well, the intention wasn't to be. And this is, if we look at that piece as a showpiece, okay, maybe it's superficial, but if you look at it what it really is, which is folk music, that's a fascinating thing. So this is kind of his, to me, I would say it's his origins, would be that. Liszt went to Vienna, which is not far from where he was from. Actually, it's a funny aside that he never spoke Hungarian. You know, he grew up speaking German. Franz is his first name, Franz Liszt. You know, because Austro-Hungary, it was all one thing. And later in life, when he became sort of wrapped up in Hungarian independence, political causes, he felt he would kind of be embarrassed because he'd go to Budapest and he couldn't speak a word of Hungarian. But he always deeply identified as Hungarian, as you can hear in the music. So he goes to Paris, he studies with, Vienna first, studies with Czerny. Does anyone know Carl Czerny? He wrote all those exercises for the piano. He ruined some of our childhoods, you know. But I mean, it's not fair. Czerny was a great composer. He was a student himself of Beethoven. And Czerny was a big cat lover, had many cats, which is on my list, a very high thing. I love cats. So Czerny said that the young Liszt played, he said Liszt was like 11 years old at that time. So the young boy has talent, but he plays like he's drunk. That's what Czerny said. So Czerny gave him this thorough grounding in proper technical, you know. And the young Liszt actually met Beethoven, and Beethoven, there's a story, maybe it's a myth, I don't know, but Beethoven apparently kissed his forehead. It's kind of this blessing, you know, this guy is going to be great. But as often happens in life, it wasn't a straight path for Liszt. He ended up in Paris, which was the center of music, but also piano manufacturing at that time. You know, Beethoven famously would break pianos, you may have heard. Well, some of those things that Liszt did would have broken the Viennese pianos. But do you see this metal thing here? That's the cast iron frame. That allows for very big sounds. And those pianos with these cast iron frames were being made in Paris and London, not Vienna. They weren't. So maybe that's why, you know, Mozart is, is going to be a different, maybe, sound from Liszt. So Liszt goes to Paris. There were tons of piano virtuosos at that time taking advantage of the instrument, the new construction of the instrument. And the funny thing is Liszt he didn't progress really. He fell apart. He got very depressed. He taught many, many lessons. He fell in love with this kind of nobleman's daughter or something, and she rejected him. This is a long story. He almost jumped in the Seine River at one point. His father was dying, and he told his father, you know, I want to become a priest. This is another theme in his life. He was very religious. His father said, please don't. And it's, you know, he was in a low place, let's put it that way. And then he heard Paganini play the violin. Niccolo Paganini, Italian virtuoso. Blew him out of the water. Liszt, it's kind of like a Rocky Balboa moment. He said, I'm going to lock myself. It's a little bit mythology too, I think, but not really, totally. He locked himself in a room for a couple years, practiced 15, 12 hours a day, I don't know, while reading Dante, Goethe, Shakespeare, because he wasn't that educated either. He reinvented himself. And one of the first things he did during that period was to take Paganini's solo violin caprices, rearrange it for piano. That's why I'm going to play a couple of those now. So arrangement is an art form. It's not simply, it's like translation. You don't just copy word for word or note for note. You have to reimagine the piece for the instrument and make some changes, necessary changes. So the first piece, it's actually a conjunction of two Paganini caprices, and it's called Tremolo. Tremolo means it's similar to the opening of the Rhapsody, but it's a little different context. It's a violin tremolo. This, you hear, it's this vibrating thing. So again, Liszt takes this and turns it into a whole piano sort of fantasy. This is the first of the Grande Étude de Paganini by Liszt, and yeah, crazy piece, very crazy. you know, it's a very interesting experience to compare the original on the solo violin, no piano accompaniment, with that. And they're so different because on the piano, to me, it turns into like a painting by Turner or Delacroix or someone from that time. It becomes very grandiose. On the violin by itself, it's not that it's not grandiose, but it's just such a different timbre and feel that it's practically a different piece or set of. It's actually, this is a compilation of a couple of them. That opening, that's one caprice, and then the middle section with the little, you know, the tremolo is another one. I'm going to play or attempt another one, which is the second one, and this is a more actually literal translation or arrangement, if you will, of another one of the caprices of Paganini. This one, I struggled with it to find what's behind it. My wife says she's a pianist, a wonderful pianist, and I consult her probably the most on matters, musical matters. You know, she's also working at ECU as a pianist, so accompanist, and she's always said, you know, this piece, it just sounds so stupid. You know, that's part of it. So that part, it sounds like one of our cats just running across the room being an idiot. But I think that and I've worked on this, and she likes it now, because what I found is it's the humor in it. It's just this sense of humor in it. And in classical music, we tend to lose sight of that. That music can be fun and funny. It's not all serious and depressing, and it shouldn't be. Here it is. But the middle is a little crazy, so. So that's, I would say, to me, the Hungarian Rhapsody and those two are a big part of his personality. Extroverted, virtuosic, and this was not only him, but there were many others who were riding this wave of the new piano construction and just writing for the piano in this very extravagant way, I would say, and pushing the limits of what's possible. And that piece, those last two especially, are just, they're hard. They drove me nuts learning them. So, but Liszt, you know, many, and I'm not trying to put these people down, but there are many composers, I think they should be reconsidered. But people like Kalkbrenner or Moscheles Thalberg, these are names of contemporaries of Liszt, worth looking into. But some of them are kind of forgotten. You know, Kalkbrenner, they said that he could play octaves, which you heard in the middle. Those are octaves. He said that Kalkbrenner's octaves were so loud that if the wind was right, you could hear him in Vienna from Paris. And so they, you know, this was taken to a point of almost caricature. And Liszt, at this point, he become like a rock star, essentially. But he was not such a two-dimensional man. You know, there was the religious side of him, and there were so many other sides of him. You know, on the one hand, he was living, yes, like a rock star. I don't need to get into it all in detail. But he had this thirst for other things. You know, he befriended Chopin in Paris. Chopin was born a year earlier and from Poland, pretty close to Hungary. And he learned from Chopin, he learned poeticism in music, lyricism, how to be understated at times. And he also came across the music of, at that time, a completely unknown composer, Franz Schubert. Schubert, born in 1798, died in 1797 to 1828. He lived 31 years, Schubert. And Schubert wrote these songs for voice and piano that take melody and expressivity to this whole other level. And so he's from Vienna, of course, Schubert. And Liszt discovered at that time this unknown composer, and he found in him this kindred romantic spirit. And what he did was he arranged many of Schubert's songs, Lieder, for solo piano. So that's why I tell people, don't worry, I'm not going to sing in German for you, but I will just play it, the Liszt arrangement. So the first one is the Stanza, the Serenade, which is a very famous melody. You probably heard it before somewhere. It's just famous, and it's been played in so many different versions. And notice what Liszt does to it, because he sticks to what's written in the beginning, and then he puts the melody in different registers of the piano, lower, higher, and he does these echo effects, and you hear the echo? It's like you have three hands almost, should sound like it. So he does this, he turns it into a piano piece, essentially. The goal being to make the piano sing like a human voice would. So here's the Serenade, the Stanza, and it is, to me, it's a different side of Liszt that you're going to see now, or hear rather. Different side of Liszt. Now I'm going to play another one of these Schubert arrangements because I love them. This is called Auf dem Wasser zu singen, which means singing on the waves. And it's, again, I'm not going to sing it in German, but it's supposed to be sung. It's in the form of a barcarolle. A barcarolle is a Venetian gondolier's song, which rhythmically is, I would say, it's in an unsteady feeling of 6. Let me demonstrate. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. But to really make it a barcarolle, it has to be a little, you have to get a little seasick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like the boat, a boat doesn't just go like that. It goes like when I was driving in the wind yesterday, my car was going like that. So that's what this is. Of course, just like the serenade, the stanchen before, it starts out, he starts out pretty close to what's written by Schubert, and then he goes off into Liszt land at the end. Turns it into his own thing. So, and also, yeah, it's interesting, you'll notice the melody recurs in different parts of the piano. It starts out here, and then it goes in the middle, and then it goes, and then finally, at the end. So he has this progression. Of course, a singer can't do that because it's for one singer, but he gives you the illusion of different voice types singing. And it's really interesting how he does that. by the end, you see that's Liszt taking the music and putting his own spin on it, if you will. So next I'm going to play a bit longer and crazier even piece. So if you're, Liszt can get quite intense. So this is a very intense piece, and I think it's when I hurt my thumb yesterday, so I'll try not to again. But this piece is called The Legend, it's a long title, The Legend of St. Francis of Paolo Walking on the Water. So this is not St. Francis of Assisi. Liszt liked him too and wrote another piece about him. I'm not playing that. St. Francis of Paolo was this traveling beggar, became a saint later, in the 12th century in what's now Italy. And the story goes, the legend is that he was at the Straits of Messina, which is, if Italy is like a boot and Sicily is like a soccer ball, the Straits of Messina is the space, the water between. It's a very stormy body of water, I've heard. I've never been. I'd love to go and have some good food maybe, but some other day, some other time. But the story is that the boatmen, they somehow knew about this guy, St. Francis of Paolo, and they said, well, if you're such a holy man, why don't you just walk across the water? And he said, okay, and he did. He took his jacket and his walking stick and made it into a sail, and he just sailed across. But the water was not so smooth, so the piece depicts this tumult. And then at the very end, it sort of resolves and the sun comes out and he says a little prayer and happily ever after, right? So in a way, you could see this as a emblematic or symbolic of Liszt's inner life. He was torn between the tumults of worldly life and also the calling to be a priest, which he got very close to doing towards the end of his life. This is from his middle years, 1850s or 60s even. And here's a story, and I don't mean to tell this to cause any offense. I think it just illustrates Liszt, the religious side of Liszt, which was complicated. I think he was genuinely a person of faith, but he had this other side of him too. So he was, and I think this is true, I've corroborated it with a few books, that he went to the Sistine Chapel to be finally ordained. Liszt was spending a lot of his time in the Vatican towards the end of his life. And if you see photographs of the old Liszt, he's wearing a priest's collar and black robe, so he really was close to getting there. He's about to be ordained, and there was a piano in the corner there. So he saw it, and he said, okay, I'll start playing. And he started playing, and all the nuns fainted. And so the bishop came out, tapped him on the shoulder, and he said, get out of here, skedaddle. I think it's a fascinating story. It reminds me a bit of a man who died recently, Jerry Lee Lewis, who was similarly torn between he was going to become a Pentecostal preacher. And he played some boogie woogie gospel at the Waxahachie Bible College in Dallas. It's a long title. And the headmaster threw him out, said, get out. So, he played something like that, and it got him kicked out in the 50s. Similar story. Anyways, and actually that parallel between the two is, I think it's quite, if you look into Jerry Lee Lewis and Liszt, I mean, it's very close. The parallels of their lives is fascinating. Anyway, this is the piece. It's crazy. Good luck to you, good luck to me. We're all going to need it, because it's a great piece, but it's a workout. That's why I didn't open this whole way. All right.
that thumb. Well, anyway, it's worth it. I put something on it later. So I don't want to keep you all too long. I'll play a few more things. I was going to say lighter music, but first one more very short, kind of heavy piece by Liszt. To conclude with Liszt, you know, he ended, his life ended, he lived a relatively long life for that time. Unlike Chopin, unlike Schubert, these people lived into his late 70s, but his last years were quite sad for a few reasons. I think one or even two, if I'm not mistaken, of his adult children died. Blondine, his daughter, and Daniel, his son, and that really just tore him apart, of course. And he became more and more involved in the church, in the Catholic Church, in the Vatican. And that story is not just, you know, it was a real thing. He was taking minor orders, and he was deeply involved in prayer and everything. And he also had a bit of a drinking problem by then. He drank a lot of absinthe, apparently, like a lot. And he had physical problems. He had vision problems, and this, you know, really sad. And another thing that I believe caused him great anguish was Richard Wagner, who ended up marrying one of his daughters. Liszt, in the beginning of Wagner's, you know, output as an opera composer, was very supportive of him. But it turned out Wagner, you know, turned out to be on many levels a really horrible man, a horrible friend. He sort of anointed himself as the great artist, and Liszt, although Liszt had such an influence on Wagner, that piece I played just now, Wagner took a lot from Liszt. I mean, you could hear that grandiosity and everything. But Wagner sort of, he had Bayreuth going on, and Wagner sort of put himself on this pedestal. And of course, the big elephant in the room with Wagner was his horrible anti-Semitism and racism, which Liszt was not, of course, a fan of, because it would just destroy his reputation, and Liszt would support him, and then Wagner would write some stupid thing. And this is maybe controversial what I'm saying, that I don't know, but I believe that that was part of the loneliness and despair of his later years, was that relationship. I strongly believe that. So here's a piece by Liszt, very short, very quiet, unlike everything else I've played, called Nuages Gris, Gray Clouds. And some people say that he was going into territory that would, musically, that would only be done in the 20th century. Debussy, Schoenberg, and beyond. Because this piece is weird, but it captures that a feeling, frankly, of depression, I think. And it's a fascinating piece. So it's very short, and it's strange. somebody said, I think it was about Schoenberg or someone like that later, that it's as if he breathes the air of a different planet. And I feel that's there. But it's a very evocative piece. So now I'm going to play a couple shorter things. I don't want to keep you here forever, so I'm going to play a piece by William Grant Still from the US. So we cross the Atlantic, and this is called Young Missy. It's from a set of orchestra pieces that he wrote for Paul Whiteman in the 1930s. And of course, William Grant Still, who's coming back into vogue, he should be heard more. He wrote many operas. And he was kind of the composer of the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes was a friend and wrote a lot of libretti for his operas. And then Still, like many musicians and writers, ended up in Southern California and wrote a lot of film music, which is, again, many great composers did that. Copland, Shostakovich, you name it. Vaughan Williams wrote film music, if you can believe it. So, yeah, I was playing this for my mom yesterday, who was here, and she said, I imagine it's a mother and child. So we have young kids, I do, so my wife, so at home, so I think you probably were thinking about them. But yeah, I mean, I added to that, it's a mother and child, but it's in Mississippi, because that's where he was from. I mean, he didn't live there, he ended up in New York, so, but still, his music evokes the Deep South for me. I mean, you can see those Spanish moss trees hanging off the trees, You can feel the humidity, and you can imagine that it's not like today outside. So, anyway, here it is. Another thing that I associate with this music is the improvisations of Duke Ellington. It sounds like a little bit. Yeah, exactly. That's. If I were a jazz pianist, I could, Yeah, I'm not a jazz pianist, but I will play some jazzy Christmas things at the end, I promise. Okay, here it is. What were we doing? Oh yeah, William Grant Still. Okay, forgot. So I think I'll play a couple more things. I don't want to overstay my welcome here. I could play all day, but that would drive you all crazy and me. So I'm going to play, this is an arrangement I did of We Shall Overcome by Mahalia Jackson. Well, the song is it's a spiritual, it's a folk spiritual. And Mahalia Jackson, among many, sang this during the Civil Rights era. And what's interesting is she was very close to Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King. She would consult with him, even what to say in his speeches sometimes. That's how much influence she had. And I note that before he died, she sang it faster, like this. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. After he died, she started to sing it in a slow 6/8, like this. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And it deepened, it changed, it became, there was more anguish in it. But ultimately, it's an uplifting song. And I tried to model this a bit after how Liszt would arrange Schubert. Because to me, Schubert, it feels like some of his songs are like spirituals to me. So here it is, my attempt at translating Mahalia Jackson's voice, which a piano cannot capture completely, but I've tried to channel it a little bit. So. want to finish with something light. I need to turn this off because